Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful for the opportunity to mark World Refugee Day and to highlight Scotland's efforts to welcome asylum seekers and refugees from across the world to what I would consider a safe haven in Scotland, with the opportunity to live meaningful lives free from fear and persecution. I will go on to talk about asylum seekers and refugees in Glasgow, but it is impossible to talk about this subject without first and foremost condemning in the strongest possible terms the latest appalling immigration policy of the UK Government to traffic asylum seekers to Rwanda for their claims to be considered and decided. This policy is inhumane, and the Home Office that pursues it is callous, uncaring and in breach of international obligations. As Filippo Grandi, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, stated, the UK Government has breached the foundational principle of international refugee protection. And just as you thought it couldn't strip away, the Home Office couldn't strip away further dignity, they are now electronically tagging refugees, further dehumanising and depriving human beings of even a moment of peace. By complete contrast, Scotland's approach to asylum seekers and refugees is outlined in the new Scots Refugees Integration Strategy. This approach places refugees and asylum seekers at the heart of the communities in which they live. I wholeheartedly celebrate the contribution that asylum seekers and refugees make to this country, and I agree that there are many positive aspects to Scotland's approach and practice. However, I do want to point out some things that need to improve. According to Professor Alison Phipps, UNESCO Chair in Refugee Integration through Language and Arts, the UK Government's Nationality and Borders Bill is undermining our ability to pursue a compassionate and progressive strategy. Professor Phipps highlights the efforts of the Together with Refugees coalition led by the University of Glasgow honorary graduate Dr Sabir Zazi, OBE, CEO of the Scottish Refugee Council and Just Right Scotland, a team of expert lawyers. These groups are working tirelessly to advocate for asylum seekers and to unpick the legal impact of the UK Nationality Borders Act on Scotland. I also want to mention the work that Refugees for Justice have done in preparing the Asylum Dispersal Scotland proposal. I commend it to the Minister. I would also commend it to the Home Secretary, but I fear that all compassionate approaches are far from the hostile environment agenda that is clearly set from down there. Last Monday, I was privileged to speak with asylum seekers living in Glasgow Kelvin, who had recently been residents in one of several private establishments housing asylum seekers when they arrive here. Some of their experiences were far from ideal. I was struck by their stories, previously as doctors, as teachers, professionals, all desperate to work and desperate to provide for their families. The right to work should indeed be at the heart of any compassionate system. They did pay tribute to the warm welcome they had received from Glaswegians, and they were very grateful to Migrant Empowerment for their assistance, and I note that they are actually represented here today in the Chamber. Hotel accommodation is not part of the agreement between the UK Government and those paid to house these vulnerable people. 5 days is the maximum amount of time any asylum seeker should spend in a hotel. Currently, the average stay in a hotel accommodation in Glasgow is 72 days, and many residents have been there for far longer due to lack of identified accommodation for placements, and this is unacceptable. Asylum seekers get around £40 a week from the UK Government to spend via a voucher card, which can only be used in certain shops and no change. If this card stops working, it can take days to resolve, meaning that there's no access to money, and obviously this is unacceptable. Until recently, children living in hotels. I will take the intervention if I have time.
Paul Sweeney.
I thank my Glasgow colleague for giving way on this important point about the income available to asylum seekers, which is hugely constrained compared to other parts of the population. Would you agree that, in principle, the idea of extending free concessionary travel would be a firm, practical way for us in Scotland to help asylum seekers increase their daily income?
Kaukab Stewart.
I would agree in principle of looking at any opportunity to provide dignity and respect to all those that we welcome here. And I would further suggest that all immigration policies be devolved to Scotland as soon as possible in order that we can make those decisions for ourselves. I was talking about children living in hotels, a subject close to my heart, and the children that cannot enrol in school, presiding officer, until a permanent catchment area was decided. Now, thankfully, that policy has now been changed and children can go to school from day one. So they now have the opportunity to play, to make friends and learning, which is so important. And I do want to put on record and thank the communities and staff and pupils of Garnet Hill Primary School and St Patrick's Primary School, amongst others, for their welcome to asylum-seeking children. And I myself have had the joy of teaching children from Syria and Afghanistan and have been privileged to see their progress. I do believe that we need to move from a profit motive for our asylum seeker and refugee system. It is long overdue that the right to bid for contracts to house and care for asylum seekers be returned to councils along with the funding to do so. Presiding officer, I'm mindful of my time, so I'm going to skip to my final. Finally, I would like to thank asylum seekers and refugees for their courage, their tenacity in challenging the system, for their own sakes, for the sakes of those who follow them and call Scotland their home.